The first and only time I ever bought pot, and how I almost got murdered by a 7-year-old. I'm a Gen Xer, born in '69, graduated in '87. So I was a teen through the '80s and became a young adult as the '80s rolled into the '90s. As a young teen, I was pretty much straight edge when it came to illegal drugs, pot included. I wasn't teetotal. I drank my fair share with friends in basements and hang spaces, a few house parties, and nocturnal bonfires we called bush parties, with the occasional bottle or box of wine, half sacks of cider, beer. But for the most part, I was pretty straight, and often the designated driver. Now, I wasn't morally opposed to pot. I thought it should be legal, but I'd refrained from any adolescent experimentation for a few reasons. One, I was considering a career in the law or criminal justice. I didn't want my future self to have any career paths or prospects derailed by answering yes to one of those "have you ever done" questions in the middle of an interview or screening process. Plus, I was a young, long-haired, guitar-playing rocker, exactly the kind of metalhead people assumed was always high. I didn't want to give anybody the satisfaction by playing into their expectations. You may see the long hair, but you don't know me. Fuck you. Now, this reminds me of an encounter I had with the father of a friend. He was a provincial court judge. I would have been 16 when it happened. His son and I had been on the same soccer team years earlier, so I hadn't seen the father in a while. He saw me. I forget the context. Maybe my team had just finished a match. And he wandered up to a group of us, his gaze zeroing in on me. And in front of everyone, right there on the pitch, he leaned in, casual, familiar, and said something like, "I'll be keeping an eye out for you." In my court. I felt rage. All this just based on my hair. You motherfucker, I thought. I'm an honor roll student, and the shit I know about your kid and his friends? Bullshit. So much for being an impartial adjudicator. Can you imagine his court? I was too proud and way too stubborn to let any pretentious asshole like that hang their prejudice around my neck. I got through 4 years of university without indulging in any weed, without really indulging in anything. And I wanted to do more school, but I also knew I wanted something else. I needed to travel. At 22, I spent a surf season in Hawaii, and at 23, I left Vancouver with a backpack and a surfboard and eventually a guitar, and was gone for many, many years. Started in Bali, Sumatra, Singapore, Malaysia. I even snuck my way into Burma, back when that was a thing. Then I found myself in Thailand. Now, before I left home, I'd promised myself I would loosen up, remove the stick from my ass, and let the world in. Experience life as it came. And if that meant breaking my long-standing personal prohibition on weed, so be it. And eventually, I did. Now I get it. Some of you might be thinking, so what? You bought pot. Big deal. Why is this even a story? Fair enough. And if this was happening now instead of 30 years ago, you'd be right. Pot's legal in Canada. Decriminalized in much of the world. No big deal. It's even legal in Thailand. But back then, it was a total different story. Vancouver was always ahead of the rest of Canada when it came to pot. Enforcement here was selective, penalties mostly administrative. By the late 80s, weed was showing up in head shops and cafes, unofficially tolerated, if not exactly legal. The laws were still on the books, but those books were dusty. But in Southeast Asia, the laws were brutal, severe. In some countries, possession could mean life in prison. In others, death. The legacy of the old hippie trail didn't help. Boomers had really shit the bed for those of us that followed. There were countries where you could still find yourself getting a mandatory haircut at the border. They still hated hippies that much. I had actually cut my hair at the last minute before I left Vancouver, having heard the tales. It was well advised. But there'd been no time for a new passport photo. It was quite the experience trying to explain my way through customs the first time I passed through Singapore. But that's its own story. Now, I didn't smoke anything in Indonesia, nothing in Singapore, and certainly nothing in Malaysia or Burma. But Thailand? Thailand was different. It had its own rules. I found myself at some point resident on the islands. The islands known as backpacker enclaves and retreats in the Gulf of Siam. The islands where travelers drank Thai whiskey and beer and danced under the light of the full moon to 90s trance and techno, and passed around joints and pipes and bongs while talking about crystals, love, and chakras, communing with the goddess. In Thailand, pot was illegal. It was, on paper, highly criminal. But the Thais have an expression, Mai Pen Rai, the Thai equivalent of no worries, take it easy, let it be, don't make a big deal. You could do a lot of things in Thailand that were against the law, provided you didn't make a show of it. And the truth? There's nothing criminal in Thailand that wasn't already under the control of those tasked with enforcing the laws against it. The Thai policeman who would bust someone for pot was the same Thai policeman that sanctioned its sale in the first place. Mai Pen Rai ruled. Relax. Take it easy. Everything is gonna be all right. Bob Marley set the tone. The island I lived on had once been an island of coconut plantations, owned by a handful of southern Thai families of considerable wealth and power. But like lots of old family dynasties, there were kids and more kids, new generations following new generations, each wanting, needing their own peace, a place to call their own. So the plantations were parceled out, land holdings subdivided, redistributed, sold off. And as the old coconut economy and the once vibrant fishing villages that lined its shores gave way to other interests, tourism brought change in the more. Backpackers came first. We were the tip of the spear, piercing through the protective cultural veneer. But bigger money was coming. Change was inevitable. So although there were traveler enclaves all over the island and tourism had taken hold, the remnants of these powerful Thai families and the tiny fishing villages remained. But there was another business that had been established there as well, not related to coconuts or fisheries. Maybe it had been there from the very beginning too. It was a business tied to geography and a region of the world called the Golden Triangle. Comprised of northern Thailand, Burma, and Laos, the Golden Triangle was, for decades, the source of most of the world's opium and heroin. It had been that way since the 1950s and remained that way during my time there, through to the end of the 20th century. Until Afghanistan. And all that opium and heroin had to get down from the north to transfer stations and ports as it moved on to destinations around the world. And because of a unique geographic feature known as the Thai Peninsula, 27 miles wide at its narrowest point, moving product by land was fraught with peril. The obvious solution was to transport via water, the Gulf of Siam offering some 2,000 miles of coastline from which to cast off. And so, for decades, long before the arrival of backpackers, the islands were part of that other story too. Now, on my island, what people thought were fishing boats, and some of them were also something else. This gave the place a heavy vibe, and the longer you stayed, the more you saw, and the heavier the vibe got. I still loved the place, but there was an expression oft used by long-timers. Thailand's a damned heartbreak. One of the other things you noticed the longer you stayed on the islands was how hard the women worked. They did everything, working all day from dawn to dusk. The men, in contrast, seemed to do very little in comparison. They spent the day laying on verandas, sleeping, drinking, smoking, gambling, and all the other vices. It may have been a patriarchy, but the women seemed to be the ones in charge doing all the work. So what does that say? And at some point during my time in Thailand, quite early actually, I was sitting on the beach while the bong was being passed around the fire, and I broke my cannabis cherry. And I also met a woman. I was 23, she was 33, on an extended vacation from her home in the UK. I eventually married her. We later divorced, but again, another story. If not for you, then my therapist. There are some stories not to be told. We were living together in my bungalow, and at some point, I'm sure entwined in some intimate embrace, it was suggested by her that we get a little ganja of our own to enjoy together. Now, I experienced a lot of firsts in Thailand. I could write you a list, and one of those firsts was something every man partnered with a woman has to do at some point. We woke up one morning and the need was self-evident. I had to go out alone and buy some tampons. I had a mission. And on our beach, there was really only one place to go. A little wooden hut down the beach, offset under the canopy about 500 meters away. A kind of tuck shop or a general store. It was a place owned and run by one of those OG Thai families that once owned everything on the island. Nothing fancy, a single bare light bulb hanging from a crossbeam, wooden slat walls, a palm-thatched roof, perimeter shelves lined with essentials like toothpaste and candles, mosquito coils, bags of crisps, and of course things like tampons and toilet tissue. A square card table sat empty in the middle of the room, and behind a little counter with bottles of Thai whiskey branded Mekong, and what I later learned was a Thai moonshine called Lao Khao, stood a middle-aged Thai man who looked like he stepped right out of an Asian gangster movie. My instructions had been specific. My lady, having already scoped them out on an earlier visit, knew exactly what she wanted. I grabbed them off the shelf, purposely placing them in front of the man. He stood there, stone cold silent, looking right through me. What kind of Eastern cultural taboo had I just violated, I wondered. I don't remember how much I paid, maybe like 50 baht, about $1.50. It wasn't a lot, but we completed the deal and I got the hell out of there. It had been my initiation into a world of new responsibility, procurement of lady things. And now weeks later, with that other mission in hand, the quest for ganja, I found myself making my way back up the beach to that same little shack nestled under the canopy of the jungle, because of course, you didn't just buy tampons there. I had already researched the whole process. I made sure I knew the ins and outs of how everything worked before the first bong ever touched my lips. I understood what it was, where it came from, and how the whole system worked. So when the request came, I was ready, or so I thought. I was told you could buy a little baggie of pot from the wooden hut for 100 Thai baht. You were just supposed to walk in and ask for it like you were buying a bag of potato chips. It was easy, everyone told me. My pen rye. So with all the confidence expected of a newly minted procurer of tampons, feeling like one of the knights of chivalry, I set out to the hut to buy a little baggie of weed for me and my lady. And in my pocket, a cylindrically shaped black plastic film container with a little gray lid. In my day, all the heads carried their pot in these. Come on, I knew this shit. With my hands in my pockets, running the edge of my 100 baht note between my fingers with one hand and gripping the film canister tight with the other, I made my way back up the beach and back to the shack. All the while, my inner dialogue stealing my courage and resolve. You can do this. Walking up the steps, all the beach and jungle structures here were built on elevated platforms about 4 or 5 feet off the ground, and approaching the entrance, I stepped inside and froze. On that card table, the one that had sat empty before in the middle of the room, was an enormous pile of weed. And I mean enormous, Cheech and Chong style, ridiculously enormous. A veritable mountain of ganja that would make Tony Montana pause. And next to it, a little pile of twigs and sticks, and another little pile of seeds. Somebody was obviously sorting through this, and that somebody was sitting right there at the table. And to his right, just off to the side of his little sorted piles, was a black .38 caliber revolver on full display. And that somebody was James Bond. Now here's something you need to know about Thailand. The Thais loved 80s action movies. They loved the characters, they loved the actors, and they loved them so much they sometimes named their kids after them. It wasn't uncommon to meet a Rocky Balboa, a John Rambo, a Clint Eastwood, or even a Sly Stallone. I knew several such kids. I even knew a Charles Bronson. It was just a thing. So, of course, when I say James Bond was sitting at the table in front of a mountain of ganja with a loaded .38 caliber revolver at the ready, I really mean James Bond. James Bond, the 7-year-old son of the Thai gangster-looking guy I'd bought the tampons from. Now I knew James Bond, and he knew me. We'd seen each other around. He was like a little general, leading the other kids who lived near my enclave in the kind of play that only kids raised where the jungle meets the sea could entertain. But he was also tasked with other things. I'd seen him walking up the beach, machete in hand, husking coconuts, and climbing trees to pick papaya. I saw him chase down chickens that I'm pretty sure ended up in one of my Thai curries. I saw him sitting with the men on their verandas, keeping silent watch while they drank. Always watching, always listening. Sometimes I'd call out to him, "Hey, James Bond!" And sometimes he'd give me a look, one that, at best maybe communicated tolerance. Other times he'd look right through me, like I wasn't even there. The other kids on the beach loved me. We laughed and played together sometimes. I'd act all goofy. Their parents would shake their heads in wonder, who is this crazy foreigner? I was well received. But James Bond? I wasn't quite sure where I stood with him. It was a bit of a mystery. So as I stood there looking at James Bond, he looking at me looking at the mountain of ganja and the revolver on the table, he watched my hands move around in my pockets. Well, I knew we were in a situation. His hand hovered near the gun. Then I saw the machete leaning up against the leg of the table. He caught the glance. That moment is still as vivid today as the day it happened. This could go so many such ways, I was thinking. The decision tree in my mind was being rendered in real time. My immediate options presented from within. I could run, but I'd never make the threshold of that door before he put one in my back. If he went for the gun, I could go for the machete, and if I survived the first round, I'd get at least one swing in, which was probably all I needed. But even if I came out the victor, I'd never get off the island. My options were limited. I slowly withdrew my hands from my pockets, still holding the 100-baht note in one and the film canister in the other. Without blinking or taking his eyes off me, James Bond magically manifested a little bag of ganja in his hand. Money and weed was exchanged. We did the deal. And as I stood there trying to jam that little baggie of weed into my film canister, I shot James Bond a nervous smile. "James Bond," I offered up a little laugh. His response was the look in his eyes that said, "Get lost, clown. I'm busy." Our business was done. And when I got back to my bungalow, my lady waiting on my return, I didn't know what to say. "All good?" she asked. And my answer, well, it was the only one I could really give. My pen rai. My pen rai. I mean, what else was I going to say?